the back campus area. From the parking lot, we go this way to the city-owned property. This used to be an army base, they tell me. Or at least Brian Pope told me. The exhibitors walk this way to start setting past these doors. More stuff. Here comes Bill.
Hey, this is gonna
Oh, Evan is in the other room now. There's Dave. I'm filming the before and after.
These are not vintage.
Look at that. Very nice. Very nice. Ooh, how does that work for you?
This is good.
It's good, huh?
It sound so, but
yeah.
it's usually my second camera anyway, so.
Okay. Because I've been interested in getting one of these.
Yeah, I think, well actually for my backpacking trip this summer, I'm going to be backpacking in New Mexico for 2 weeks. And there's nothing like something this small that shoots high definition.
Ooh, very nice. Does the battery last a while, or?
I got special batteries. The regular battery is good for maybe not even an hour.
Oh, that's no good.
But this I think is 2 to 3 depending on how much you're actually shooting.
Very good.
Probably closer to 2. This is the second largest battery they make for this. And
Ryan Pope and
and it wasn't even rubbing that hard. It just it was like
Cameron taking pictures of Brian's PEP 2001.
Wait, what?
There we are. He opens the hood for us to see inside.
Striptease.
Unexpanded. Hey, that transformer looks like it's great shape.
Which memory chips?
That's the 4116.
The 4116.
And the 6540.
6540.
Flash. I kind of remembered where mine was.
Well, it's like I'm hiding in that picture. I'm so far away, you can't even tell that it's me. It's June 11, 1979. So it's lasted that well. So.
And the amazing part is now, if I see them, it's a picture of me at a DevCon holding up the AAA prototype board. It must have been near the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, if it's AAA.
And I have the AAA board here too. I have a AAA board. I don't have any chips. What? No, I was trying to get rid of some of that stuff because I just had so much junk. I had like 2s and 3s of things. I knew some people wanted them and I didn't. They're just, especially working computers. It's like I hate to see a working computer sit around and not get used if somebody wants to use it. So like I sold off my +4 to a guy who's in like this major league +4 users group. It's like, you know, those poor guys, they need all the help they can get.
I don't think I ever had a 10 or a +4.
I had one of the only possible complete +4. It was actually 364 systems. That's the +4 with tragic voice volume. Because
you guys are going to sit up.
Oh, there's Bill.
Your hair's all over the place today, man. You guys are going to sit up here while I'll check those. Okay. And then we'll open up to you guys and your audience. Everything. Even that. All right. That was our. Was that you that held by candles yesterday? No, that was the Arkman.
Artie brought a book himself.
Yeah. And then when Chuck's done, you guys will go up to the stand. All right. We're going to start at like 10:10.
Really old-fashioned PC power
Yeah, no kidding. That's how you taste state of the art, though, man.
Well, compared to like some weird Commodore house.
Any static procedures, man?
Well, it doesn't actually matter that much. This is the AAA board, Advanced Amiga Architecture. There are only 2 sets of chips, and there were 3 boards. So,
Did you bring all your prep in with you? You might go grab mine.
yeah, I brought. Yeah, because you know, we're going to have it around.
Plus, the cables the guy asked for, they're good. It's like I picked them up and they're all gummy from
Gummy? Yeah.
sitting in the box for 20 years.
Most of the boards that we had around is like Amiga.
They're huge.
On the way down, I was saying to Jared was to pass that things that you were to show up battle and
oh, yeah, there was nothing to make me gravitate here. So. Yeah, you remember those spirits all the travel?
Yeah, my plan just like I
It's not like people I know, and I only recently did I even figure out who they were. It's only when I read the Bagnall's book that I forgot, oh, these were the people from the very end of the whole thing. So I go and I stay for like 10 minutes. You know, Jerry one time said, oh, I heard what was it, the Sprite Logic must have been very eloquent in the Vic, and I started laughing.
In the Vic? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of brute force, actually.
I couldn't find the Vic 2 copies. I must have had them all in the original files. I found SID copies, but discussion of SID design units and stuff like that.
Oh, I gotta see this.
This guy's the note taker. Everywhere we went, he had his legal pad, and then when the lawyers wanted something, they'd take all his legal pads, and he'd be like lost.
Unfortunately, when I left, I had like all the old design notes and everything organized for basically legal research. I had like filing cabinet, like 4 high, lateral, clear full. It's like the only thing I have left is things I had taken home and forgot, or you know, they weren't a real project, and they're like the junk notes that I just never threw away.
All this stuff.
You should have brought that out. I would have got
some of this stuff just to have, just to show what some of my practice likes.
All the stuff we could have carried out, we didn't because we weren't thinking about the future. You know, we could have had anybody just sign for it, but I have one load that I took out with me the day I left.
I probably have more Apple II and Atari design documents from working with the engineers in the early days, and them giving me copies of the stuff. And of course, that wasn't in the you know, the company archives because you know it was stuff we weren't supposed to have basically, and so we used to exchange stuff between each other. So,
oh, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we used to have to go over to Atari to borrow PAL monitors because we didn't have any PAL monitors. So it's like we go over there and borrow
He's from California before King of Prussia.
Yeah. I relocated out here in '81. So.
It's okay. Coleco came and got a cable from us at CES. So,
I actually had my Coleco. I found my Coleco offer. You know, I had a software. Yeah, I had a software. I'm like looking, going like 45,000. That was a lot of money way back then.
Yeah, it was. Consider I was making 24. I found the memo that said 40,000 Z80 cartridges don't work in production. What are you going to do?
Yeah, I found actually my original badge from 1979.
I'd auction that off.
I'm like about a quarter of the picture. You can't even see what I look like.
Well, that's so Berlin could be. That's calibrated for Berlin.
It's like whoever took that. Obviously, I could walk in any place with this badge.
You know what? Let me be your broker. I'll sell that and I'll give you a cut.
Actually, just to prove that that's me, I actually brought
the buyer is sitting right here. We know the trading price.
I brought my LCD machine.
This is the reason most people don't recognize me, because that's what I looked like back then. I was a real heavy guy. Heavy guy. I wore thick glasses, and so that's what I was like back in the early.
I knew you. I met you before that. So when I met him, he was already skinny, but he walked like this because he wasn't so used to being light that he looked like a marionette going down the hallway.
I've gained back most of the weight over the years, but so it's like the early people knew me totally different than I was like in '85 later on.
Well, you always found time to you would do all the Commodore work and then go run 4 miles every day.
Well, that was like when I finally started doing it. Yeah, it's like I used to go running 80 miles.
I would just go drinking for 4 hours. These guys seem to.
I've been just kind of stuck in that for the last year. I can tell you all about Hadamard transforms and quantizing using core and stuff.
He worked at Ravisec before it became Quadrant, and they did the first software in bank decoder that got a lot of acclaim. I mean, beat the crap out of Intel's, Dell, and all those people picked up. So it's the first time somebody didn't need a chip to play a DVD. So he was supposed to get rich, but you know, here we are again.
Yeah, this business getting rich is always something else.
Hey, nice meeting you. Nice meeting you. How you doing?
Good, are you?
Good. Bill.
Ken Summerall.
Nice meeting you. You look familiar.
I'm Robert Bernardo. How you doing?
He comes to all those.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine.
She just said something earlier. I explained it for
I'm here. I'm identified.
Well, I saw Star Trek.
If you see Star Trek, that's me.
Yeah, he's got the wrong convention.
No, I'm at the right convention.
That's a long way to come, though.
The biggest thing for me is
I do some coffee coasters and stuff. I left them sitting in my office when I left. 65-2 stuff, all that stuff. I wish I had it today.
Let me ask you a question. Somebody sent me a picture of a VDC card. Did anything like that ever get manufactured? Well, I mean, I had an 8563.
A cartridge for which we should think people are buying parts for.
Figure the design of the 128.
Was there an 8563 cartridge?
Because I've got a picture of a prototype.
one.
Okay. As in one, or
I built it by 10.
Because somebody sent me a picture of it. I want to find out about it.
The only one I know, remember me? I
haven't seen you on the
Were you at VCF East?
Was just the same paper was originally sent in. I got another copy I made a couple. It's basically the 1978 proposal that they were trying to sell to us originally from Centertech. They were trying to get Commodore to join in on the design on it originally. So it's got the architectural changes and the instruction set. It's not easy to read, but
don't know what happened.
and it also has kind of the change document with it. So. Yeah, the opcodes. That's what that table is. I know it's hard to read, but that's what the table, and they describe the actual how they were changing the instruction set. Yeah, this would be pretty easy to implement these days.
You remember me saying when a chip designer did like a month's design, they'd spend 5 months with the scale checking the geometry, and you were judged by how good you did your checking on how brilliant of a designer you were. And if you couldn't keep your mind focused for 4 months, you didn't make the grade.
Just remember, this is supposed to be implemented in 1978, MOS technology, so it was pretty simple. So,
Thank you very much.
Were you born yet? Okay.
You know, Centertech can come after you, but yeah, like Centertech existed for the past 20 years.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very
I
much.
have lots of other design documents like that. You can take a look and see if there's anything else that interests you.
Come right later. That'd be cool.
A proposal for the 6516, a 16-bit variant of a 6502.
Could you ask him to say something? Can you say something for a microphone? Hello.
Video is too slow to catch them.
Okay.
Video on. What do you say about the video?
All right, you can go ahead and talk. We can hear you.
Hold on a second. Let me get my headset on.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes. Test the network.
Okay. I was trying to show you my factory working, but they decided to leave early. Can you see them at all?
Yes.
There we go.
That's the order.
Okay, now we get out of the way. Can you guys see me now?
You're a little off camera, though.
Oh, let's see the whole.
I intend to be off camera for just a second.
Okay.
Okay, what you're seeing, and I'm sorry you missed the ladies, but they were going home. What you're seeing is 4,500 personal computers connected with 500 servers, also made with personal computers. And they run a factory of 1,600 ladies doing a very complex job of combining chips that don't work for anybody else and repairing chips that don't work for anybody else into DIM project which go into personal computers. So I thought you might like to see one of what I call an endpoint. Okay? We'll come back, look at myself for a second, and I gotta get my notes up. Are you ready for me to start the presentation? I want you to see the room.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are, Chuck. Everything's out.
And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Could you put your hat just a little bit back in your head?
No, because it's a stupid headset.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And I need the headset because you guys are having trouble hearing me without it. Here, a second. I'm trying to hat over the headset. Is that better?
Yes. There you go.
Can you hear me okay now?
You're awesome.
Okay, hold on a second. Get my notes started here because I don't want to miss. I'm doing a whole lot of people's names that nobody will ever care about except me. But because I don't want to miss them. Okay, welcome to paradise. I'm in a country called Sri Lanka, which is truly, in fact, some people believe it's the paradise that Adam and Eve was thrown out of. The ladies that you saw for a brief second, there's about 1,600 of them. As I said, they run 450 personal computers with 500 loosely coupled servers. We use barcodes and people to design and implement a patent on how you combine chips and how do you make die. And they use computers as their workplace, right? Without worrying about programming, without anything else. This is an endpoint. Rockets designed by computers and run by computers. Gaming, all are endpoints. Doing this speech by video and Skype is another endpoint. I want to apologize to everybody who came to the meeting expecting to see my ugly face, other than on camera. I had planned on being in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania during this time, but we had an exciting quarter in our business, which is a memory business, in which the price of our end product fell by 1.5 times. And so I had to come back to the factory and put some things in place to make sure we made a profit this quarter. And I couldn't come. But I thought it would be kind of fun to do it this way anyhow. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes. Most definitely.
Am I speaking too fast?
No.
Okay. I have to be careful because I'm in a country where people speak English as a second language. And so I try to slow down. But talking to you guys, I'm liable to speed up. I'm going to make a comment that we did a PC camera at Commodore in 1979. I wish I remember the guy's name. He was a little strange. But he got the previous technology before CMOS LCD. And he made a video camera and he hooked it up on the computer and he was going to include it in a Commodore product and it was also going to be included in what was called a toy. But he was lost in the jack attack when we got rid of a bunch of people. And it never happened at Commodore. At least I don't think it did. Maybe it happened after we were gone. The whole internet, email, chat are endpoints. We could spend a good part of this hour talking about endpoints. I've given you some examples. I just wanted to show you our little funny factory. But for one time only, I'd like to talk about how we got to where 30 years ago we shipped the first personal computer. If you don't mind, part of it has to do with what was inside my head. And I'd like to kind of explain how it got there. And then we'll pick the people up as we go. All right? I graduated from college at the University of Maine in 1959. In 1959, although this is a major campus graduating thousands of people every year, there was not one computer on the campus. There was, luckily for me, a guy who had worked with Claude Shannon, who's really the inventor of the whole concept of information theory. And he worked with Shannon, and he had a nervous breakdown. Because he had a nervous breakdown, he moved to the University of Maine. They gave him 2 classes a week, and what he taught in that class was information theory for the masses. He spent weeks teaching us about the ear and the eye, because he said all information that goes to human beings have to be communicated through these techniques. What he did was get me totally hooked on the concept of Boolean logic, binary arithmetic, and everything else, to the point that I changed my life. I only interviewed companies that would give me a computer job. I had been in the West with the Marine Corps. I wanted to go West, so I wound up going to work for General Electric Company with the commitment that I would go to their plant in Phoenix. When I first went to Phoenix, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We're listening.
Okay, well, I thought I heard some feedback that said maybe you couldn't. I'm sorry, I'll just keep going unless you shout at me, all right? My first job when I went to work for the computer company was building a computer, actually a peripheral, a card reader, building with PC boards that had an AND gate, no, 3 AND gates or 1 flip-flop on a PC board. All made with transistors. We weren't at LSI or anyplace else. Every computer that we were working on at that time had only core memory. I left Phoenix for a while and went to our computer laboratory in Palo Alto, and where I worked on things like cryogenics. We hoped that cryogenics would make fast computers, but it didn't. And I met 3 key people there. I met a guy by the name of Joe Weizenbaum, and I'll explain why Joe's key in a couple minutes. Bill Davidow, who later sold me and a whole bunch of people on the concept of the 8088 when we did our first PC clone, and a guy by the name of Bob Schreiner, who I'll pick up in a minute. When I went back to Phoenix, we started designing a generation of computers that were going to be limited multitasking. To do any kind of multitasking required that we had hard drives. My first hard drive, which I got a chance to work on and do the design for, was 6 feet tall, 4 feet across, had 5 megabytes of hard drive, and was accessed by pulling a coil on a motor. At that time, we figured out that zone recording would give us a much higher density. And we actually filed a patent on zone recording, which is used in every computer today, or every disk drive today. But the hardware to do it was not possible. With the kind of hardware we had, the logic required to do that just couldn't be done. So literally the patent ran out before the technology for semiconductors caught up to it. I worked in, I moved from doing design into designing computers for other people and doing PC layout. Doing that job, I got my own personal computer. My first personal computer was an NCR 304 that had hardwired macros and 4 tape drives. My second personal computer was a GE 400, which was one of these multitasking things we started earlier with a real hard drive system. And I got a chance to do a lot of things in the early creation of how you use a hard drive. While I was at GE, they were pioneering communications using computers. One really key guy by the name of Larry Hiddle taught the whole company that you could talk over a teletype interface and communicate with a computer anywhere. And because of that, because of what he did, there was a guy at Dartmouth that had a genius that wanted to teach engineers how to use computers in their work. And I can't find his name. If anybody knows it, I'd love to have it. I'm thinking about trying to get Bill and a couple other people to put together a website just honoring that guy, because he was the one that created the concept of BASIC, the concept of using BASIC in a remote way, and he's never got one bit of fame. Okay, I've got one more idea on how to get his name, and if I do, I'll make sure it gets on the Commodore website at least. Okay, anyhow, his idea was he was going to give all the engineers a class, 1 hour. He invented this little language that they could learn in that hour that was kind of algorithmic based, a little bit like alcohol, but was very, very simple to train and use. And what he needed was an online computing system. So we built the first online computing system for him, using some technology we had in place and that Peddle created. And in Dartmouth at that point, then every student was given a 1 hour lecture and access to a teletype. Let me give you an example of what that meant. Some of you probably still fool around with BASIC, and you probably don't use data statements very much except for standards. But you got to remember that the reason he invented the data statement was he had a bunch of people using teletypes and he didn't want to fool around with I/O. So he basically created data statements as the I/O that worked with a teletype and a student. All right? At GE, I taught the first class of BASIC to our engineers, most of whom were programming in other languages, Algol, Fortran, COBOL, and they didn't really care. I went to a very big computer center in Ohio where we were building engines for the DC-10, and they had a massive computer operation, and I was the technology guy for that. And what we discovered was there were a bunch of engineers there using a weighing system that was programmable calculators, but they mostly were programmed in BASIC. And then we built 2 computer centers just for engineers who wrote their own programs to design engines. We also, at that point, set up several computing centers inside the company. And this group that business was very advanced. And so we ran BASIC for all of the other departments. Based on the work we did, GE decided to go live with BASIC and time sharing. And what they were big computers with central databases and online capability, but very slow, and very few monitors. Actually, just mostly building teletypes and monitors. Okay, about the same time, all universities started making BASIC a requirement for all of the disciplines in the school, so that everybody came out of school trained in BASIC. And because of what GE was doing, they had a chance to use BASIC in their work. This was in the late 60s, right? Early 70s. And during that same time is when there was a revolt against science. Most of you are probably too young to remember it. But we stopped work on the ultrasonic airplanes, we quit doing MO, we did a whole lot of things because the people were in the universities and were in the long beards and so forth, were revolting against anything technology, right? You're going to go back to the nature. And one of the things that happened was that they started trashing computer rooms. So most companies literally put walls around their computer rooms and security around their computer rooms. And so if you wanted to use a computer in a big company, the only way you could use a computer is you would make up a deck of cards, you take it down, leave it in a tray, and maybe a day or so later you'd get your computer. All right? So at the same time, the cost of doing this online, centralized, very expensive system called time sharing basically meant that GE had to charge too much. All the companies took a look at their time sharing bill because everybody was using it, and they stopped time sharing. So students still learn BASIC. They learned how to use it, they learned how to write programs in it, but after they left school, they couldn't use it. When I went back to Phoenix from my job in Ohio, I sat down and we were designing a cash register system. And the cash register system at the time I went there was a very online cash register system. You hit a key and had to go all the way to a central site, come back and tell you what the key was. There was no local storage, no local intelligence. I'll tell you what happened to that in a minute. I looked at that and a bunch of other things that kind of been in my head and just developed the concept of distributed intelligence. Changed my life again. I've been working on distributed intelligence ever since. When I was at Phoenix, a guy by the name of Bob Schreiner, I'm going to hear his name 2 or 3 more times, all right, took me to Fairchild and showed me what Fairchild could do with custom silicon. So we developed a theory inside the company with me and several other people that we could build intelligent cash registers, we could build intelligent credit verification with the intelligence in the device. And we were going against the established party line, which was said everything is online and online computing. Well, a funny thing happened. They put pennies online, and they put every cash register in Penny's stores in Orange County online as a test case. And somebody ran a car into a telephone pole outside the central processing area. And in every store that Penny's had in Orange County that day, which was the day after Thanksgiving, they could not sell anything. So that was kind of the end of online cash registers, right? Which should have happened. It wouldn't have gone away as fast if we hadn't had that fiasco. But we were right. We were right that distributed intelligence was going to work. One other thing was going on at the same time, and I'm going to try, I really will tie these all together in a couple minutes. At GE, they had developed a pretty fast multitasking system with the ability to do a significant amount of communications. Dr. Joe Weizenbaum, who I met back in the computer lab, had gone to MIT, and he developed a theory that says if I give a programmer total space, right? He doesn't have any limitations in his code, doesn't have any limitation in his data size. I will be able to develop programs that work better, faster. And so he got MIT to fund a program called Project Mac, which, by the way, any of you that have been through MIT, you're still there. It's still Multex. It was revolutionary because what he did was to show he was correct, that with that kind of resource, a programmer could do anything. And the idea was very expensive online system. It was so expensive, and Multex was relatively complex operating system, that I'm going to forget that I had it just a second ago. Guys that work for Bell Telephone, Western Electric, I think it was. Anyhow, at that lab for Bell, these guys took a look and said, this is a great system, but we can't afford to keep using it, it's too expensive. So they took a mini computer from DEC, and they wrote a program that was a subset of Multex, which all of you know is Unix. Now the word Unix, if you think about it, doesn't mean multitasking 35 million people using the same computer. These guys actually did intend it to be a simple one-person machine, but of course they put all the stuff over from Multex, which meant they could do multitasking. They also, along the way, invented C. Okay? So what we had was a real proof that giving a programmer or giving individuals enough compute power that belonged to them, that we could do a better product. Okay, out of GE to build cash registers, automated gas pumps, and credit verification systems in 1970. It was a great concept. We actually built a demo unit using as a memory national shift registers because there weren't any memories, right? And I made it work and I showed it to everybody. And they said, well, what can you build it for? And we did some calculation, and without going to silicon, we couldn't do it. So we didn't have money to go do 6 custom silicon devices, and I had to have a building block. So I went to work for a guy at Motorola who made the 6800 happen. He was a calculator guy. He said, I believe the world needs a microprocessor. And everybody else said, what's a microprocessor? And what he defined it as was kind of a super calculator, but he knew it really shouldn't be. So he said to me, he hired me, saying, look, you already know what you want. Go make it happen. And they gave me a chance to do that. We developed the programmable I/O device, several changes to structure of the 6800 that made it a product that we ultimately sold to a whole lot of people, right? Ultimately, Motorola got to put all their microprocessors in the cars and everything else, which result in the work we did. But the problem was that Motorola marketing guys thought what we had built was a replacement for the mini computer. Now, mini computers at that time were going for $700, $800 minimum, and by the time you built them up, they were starting to grow big because of Unix. And so these guys said, well, I got a $300 mini computer, that's what the world needs. Okay? I did a class at Motorola because nobody else understood microprocessors except me. Sorry to say, I'm not trying to brag about it, just literally everybody was in designing microprocessors at that time. Intel, every place else came from a calculator background, didn't understand what you did with a microprocessor. So I did a class for the application guys, and in the class, the guy was on sabbatical from our state by the name of Roger Camp. Dr. Roger Camp helped me change the world, and you're going to see how as we go through this thing. All right? When I go out and do all the applications support for Motorola, again, I was understood what they did. So when I would be with customers, we'd go through this discussion about the 6800 and how wonderful they'd fall in love with their I/O devices, and then they would say the process is too expensive. So what I would do is I would sit down at the blackboard, and we would write down the minimum instruction set, and they wanted a $25 microprocessor. Well, Motorola marketing guys found out I was doing it, and they got Motorola to give me a memo that says to stop. And I wrote them back a memo, and it says, guys, the minute you told me to stop, you gave me the rights to everything I've worked on. I don't care what your patent agreement would be says. When you abandon a product, it belongs to me.
Small problem with the sound here.
Right?
Hello? He won't be able to. Hello?
Brian, can you hear me?
Okay.
Hello?
I think you're better now. There was a hiccup. I think it's worse.
This used to happen to us at CS shows all the time. This is just...
Sometimes you had a can of freeze spray that would help.
Yeah. Died for the reset button.
Escort the marketing person away from the prototype.
Well, it's
Blame it on Atari.
We're good. Just one building
I'm back.
here.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, you sound good now.
There we go.
Okay. I'll turn my video off again. I'm not doing anything obscene while I don't have my video on, am I?
No, you're looking good.
Okay. I've got the bunches of notes because I said I want to get all these names because they really are people who made major contributions, most of whom were totally ignored. Okay?
Well,
You
ended right about talking about 6800.
I'm going to talk about what we were doing next. They threw me on Motorola, basically, right? Been thrown out a lot of better places. Through a series of flukes, I discovered that the engineer who did the very first magnetic ink character recognition system, who I worked for at GE for a little while, was now doing high-end calculators, semiconductors in Pennsylvania. And I talked to 2 or 3 other semiconductor companies. I had to have a semiconductor company that was going to go do this, and most of them were afraid of Motorola. But when I explained to this computer guy, when I told him what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it and why it made sense, he understood it. His name was John Pavinen, and he made almost everything that we're going to talk about afterwards possible because he backed us, right? And he helped me get sued by Motorola costing his company. But he understood and he backed me. We took a design team from Motorola and moved to Pennsylvania. If you mind, I'm going to tell you the guys' names because, again, only one of them stayed famous. Bill Minch, who is the head of the Western Design Center, who did the 816 for Apple, who did the 816 for all the video games, is still the guru of 6502. And, you know, he kept it going when the rest of us walked away. So, more power to him, and I'm working with him now on new design, actually. A guy named Rod Orville, who was one of the key designers of 6800, did the architecture with that, decided he'd rather live in the West than Pennsylvania, took off, and we've never heard from him again. Another guy by the name of Ray Hurd, who was more of a process guy, went back to Arizona working for another company. A guy by the name of Bob Mathis, who had joined us at Motorola and who was an alternate architecture. He actually designed the controller for the bank systems where you could put your money in and it would give you credit, you know, the beginning of the automated teller system. And Will and I were the two that did the logic for the 6800, and Bill and the other guys did the circuit design and the internal architecture. Will wound up working for DEC, and then I think he just went back to Pennsylvania. I have not heard from him since. If he was in the audience today, I'd love to hear from him again. One of my favorite people at one time. We had two layout guys, a guy named Harry Bauckham, who was a little crazy. Not a little crazy, a lot of crazy. And a guy named Mike James, who cost us a lot of trouble, but was a really good layout guy. Took a process guy, Terry Holt, and John Pavinen, and John developed a new 5-volt process in the same amount of time we took to develop the microprocessor. Nowadays, if you ask somebody to design a new process, they talk about $500 million and 5 million people. John and Terry did it effectively by themselves with a couple other people. We did the 6502, the VIA, and the combo chip in 9 months. One of the things about Bill Minch is he's never built a chip that didn't work the first time. Just a phenomenal guy when it comes to getting a layout to work. There's some wonderful pictures, which I couldn't get my hands on to ship around, of what we had to do the layout. We actually drew these pictures on walls. We had one entire room with 6502 on it. No simulation, none of this wonderful layout tools you have today, all in my hand. Okay? Because we knew what people wanted in a cheap micro, but also tools, we developed a cross-compiler with a guy by the name of Mike Porter, who was my first contact from Dr. Archie Camp. Mike did the cross-compiler for us, and then later on did a lot of wonderful things with me at my following companies. We got an online system, online simulation system called TIM1 with some people in California. And based on a very creative idea, because they were calculator guys, by Don McLaughlin, who was the engineering manager, and Bob Wilderhopper, who was the programming manager, it was their idea that created the KIM-1. The KIM-1 became almost like a standard for people who wanted to learn about microprocessors. You really couldn't do much with it, but it really and truly was an introductory product. It was on one board, you could buy it, it worked, it was a wonderful idea. More power to those guys, and you probably never even heard their names, but now you heard them. It's their idea, it wasn't mine. We carried it forward, but it was done by that team, which was part of the team at NWS Technology. We joined it. We introduced the 6502 at a component show in San Francisco, and we'd taken an advertisement in the paper about 2 weeks before, saying, come to this show, we'll sell you a microprocessor for $25. I remember that number came out of all the research we'd done, and we wanted to sell, we could sell one for $25 because we wanted to imply, which we ultimately did, we could sell it a lot cheaper. But the most important idea was we had it. We weren't just talking about futures. We had it. You could come by the show and buy it. 2 days before the show opened, the show guys caught on to what we were trying to do and said, no, you can't do this. You're not allowed to sell anything on the floor. You're bad guys. What are you trying to do? Run a show? And so we said, okay. So we took a suite at the St. Francis Hotel, called the MacArthur Suite. And if you went by our booth at the show, we said, take the bus over to MacArthur Suite. Well, there were so many people packed around our booth that wanted to go to the show that ultimately people would get on the bus and says, is this the bus to the MacArthur Suite? These people would came in, we laid this room out really nice. You could see the Kim one, you could see our layout, you could see the Tim, all this sort of thing. There are 2 books that were there, and I'm going to tell you a little story about how we wrote the books. That were really quite well received were there, and sitting at the table was my beautiful wife with a barrel full of microprocessors. And if you were to buy a microprocessor, she'd reach in the barrel and sell you one for 25 bucks, and then you could buy 10 bucks each for the books that we had. And you could buy Kim 1, we had some Kim 1s for sale. Ultimately, only a few sold that day, a whole bunch sold right after that. And the story about the barrel was the top 10% of the barrel had working microprocessors in it. The rest were really impressive. Okay, then we had a barrel of microprocessors. We had a very famous guy come by and buy something out of the barrel. The guy's name was Steve Jobs. He took his processor back to Woz and they created Apple. A side story, and I'm going to tell you about this guy in a second because he's a really important guy along the way. My West Coast manager talked to the Apple guys that were having trouble bringing the original Apple I out. I had this development system that weighed 550 pounds. They used to carry around, and it had a little teletype printer hooked to it. And we took it out to the garage, and we hooked it up, and we showed them what they were doing wrong, helped them develop the program. So actually, Peter and I helped bring up the Apple I. We will never get credit for that. And no, we really want one. It was because they were just another customer. Right after this show, if you don't mind, I'm going to deviate. I was just going to do something else next, but I'm going to deviate for a second. I already told you about these 2 books. Well, I had a guy work for me in Phoenix who had escaped from Czechoslovakia, and he was brilliant. You know, in fact, I had 4 Czechoslovakians that were brilliant that had all escaped from Czechoslovakia. And Peter and I formed a lifetime relationship. Peter was working for somebody else. I talked to him about joining us at West Technology to help me be my West Coast guy because he was very skilled about computers, good application guy, very pleasant guy, and knew how to sell because he actually worked for, I think it was Peddle at the time. Peter was brought back to help us write these books, and he started writing the books with me, and I had to write a lot of it. And I was busy. I was doing the marketing, I was helping finish the engineering and everything else. So Peter went to John Payman one day and said, if you don't throw Chuck out of the building and make him stay home until we finish these books, we're not going to get the books done on time. So John, being the wonderful person he was, called me in his office. He said, I've told the guards you're not allowed into the building. Go home and write the damn books. Well, thanks to Peter, the books were very well received, and I did stay home and write them because John meant it. He wouldn't let me in his building. Nice story. Peter was the guy that actually supported Apple, and another very famous customer. When I was developing, we had announced this about 2 was in the paper and everything, but we hadn't actually done the show yet. We started getting all these people sending emails and making phone calls, and I would look through the list and say, well, I'm not going to bother calls back, we'll see them at the show. And there was this one from a place called Grass Valley, California. Those of you that know California, you know it's a beautiful, wonderful place, but it's not this sort of place you expect to have a high-tech question coming through. So I got on the phone with the guy and discovered that that was the research park for Atari. So right after the show, we went up to Grass Valley, we met with these guys, and out of that came the decision that ultimately created the programmable game. Because he could see, this guy could see that with the microprocessor and the combo chip, he only needed 1 more chip to make the programmable game. Now, just before the show, we had brought on a company called Centertech, and this is the final tie to my buddy Bob Schreiner. Schreiner had left Fairchild along with all the other people at Fairchild and started Intel and all these other things, and he wanted to start his own semiconductor company, so we got Honeywell to invest in him, and he started a semiconductor company, but he was doing kind of mediocre. But he knew me and John real well, and so we went to him and said, look, we need a second source before we introduced, because Motorola didn't have a second source and Intel didn't have a second source, and we wanted to be second source so people would use our product. So Schreiner said, yeah, sure, I'll be happy to do that. Well, it turns out it was very important to him, because Atari said, we don't want to get caught up with an East Coast company doing development. They took two guys, one of whom, Jay, went on to do the, come on, oh, you know the name of it, somebody help me. Follow-on product that Jack Tramiel sold. I mean the Commodore sold.
The Amiga?
The Amiga, thank you. Jay's name's hard enough, Amiga, right? Anyhow, Jay sat down and did the design for the chip for Atari. And the combination of 3 chips, we introduced the thing. 1 week after Atari introduced our product, Motorola sued us because they were mad. Anyhow, Schreiner designed the video chip, we provided them with micro and the combo chip and created the programmable game market. Alright. At this point, we're at MS Technology. We have a great future because, you know, Atari's coming down the road. But the company was having trouble because this is a period of time when calculators started to die in the United States because the Japanese had brought in CMOS calculators. And the guys at MS Technology basically said, look, we can't really fund the bridge. So we're going to start selling Kim 1s, which we did, which helped from a cash standpoint. But I had to go out on the road and start designing customer applications that would come in faster than Atari. Well, 2 of the places that I went to, one place in Florida, and had 2 key things happen there. One, I was designing a copier, which was fun. I did that in about a week and a half. And then I was sitting at this place in Hialeah, working around the clock, designing an electronic pinball game, which was, again, a lot of fun. We did finish it, we put in shows, everybody thought it was wonderful. And ultimately, of course, all pinball games use microprocessors. Well, in the company, there was a guy who had been a musician. He followed the music guys around. He was a musician. He was a guy that went and did the sound stuff, and he had this long ponytail, and he wore shorts all the time. And he was getting busted all the time because he was a blue boxer. Okay, so he got busted for being a blue box, he got busted because he looked like a hippie. But he was really good at sound. So these guys had them sitting in his company designing the sounds for these games, which again, if any of you are old enough, you'd recall that if you went to an arcade, you were really dealing with an electromechanical device that made noise more often than you were dealing with video stuff. So that's what he did. Well, so he would work at night, and I'm going to deviate for just a second. The last thing I did on my way back from the announcing 65-2 was stop in Colorado with a company called, the guy's name I remember is Dr. Sooty. I don't really remember the name of the company. And what he was doing was taking chips. At that time, he was taking the Intel chip. He ultimately used the Z80, and he was building one at a time kits that people then put together to make their own computer. And he was doing very well. And we talked to him, and he was going to start using our product and everything else. So I at least knew him. Well, this guy with the ponytail is sitting in the same lab where I'm developing his pinball game, and he's putting together this kit. He gets the kit put together, plugs it in, says it works. And he would sit there, and I think he had a paper tape or something or other, and he took a stolen copy of Bill Gates' Basic, and he put it in, and he did a couple things. And then he said, well, okay, that's it, I'm done. And so I talked to him, I said, well, you just built yourself a computer, what do you want to do with it? He says, well, no, I wanted to build a computer, okay? But I'd like to do something with it, but I don't know how. Right? I'm figuring out what to do with it, because it doesn't do very much, right? And so he was the personal impetus that drove me to do the hack. Because he was a guy, really brilliant guy, he brought up his own computer, and all he was interested in was being a hobbyist, right? Well, I knew the Apple guys, they were selling hobbies. It was a small market for people, but I started doing some quick market research, just talking to people as I was going around talking about microprocessor. And everybody who was a programmer, or everybody who was an accountant, or everybody that was doing all of the other things said, I can't make a kid computer, and when I do, it doesn't work very well. I don't want to do that. So it became really obvious that I had to stop working on my cash register and stop working on my credit verification system. And I had to build a computer that did what those people said they wanted. And it was real easy because they all had a simple description. They wanted something that's got a video screen. My friend Larry Hill went off and put monitors in everybody's life. So most of these people had seen a computer with a monitor. They wanted a monitor, they wanted a keyboard, they wanted BASIC, okay? And at that time, they wanted something that was better than paper tape. It was an easy spec, okay? So I talked to the guy that I was dealing with in Florida, and we thought we might go off and do something with him. About that time, Commodore was a calculator company. It had been through terrible problems in Canada. A guy by the name of Irving Gould had bought the company off the street. Irving was a real aficionado for Japan. And should have wanted to put a Japanese girlfriend forever. And he came to Trammell and he said, Trammell was making mechanical calculators and he was making them in Germany and everything else. And he said, forget it, just forget it. The Japanese have some product you can use and you can tie in with some of these semiconductor companies, and we're going to make a small calculator based around this Japanese technology. And they did. And then companies like MS Technology and TI were making better and better. The Japanese really weren't making the calculator, they were making all the little pieces that went in. And that made Commodore a leading supplier of handheld calculators. The problem is it were handheld LCD not LCD.
LED.
Prior technology. I lost it. LED. Thank you very much. They were making LED technology. The battery life was about a minute, and and so you put all this power in, right? But you better keep the damn thing plugged in, okay? But it's sort of handheld, right? It's handheld to a battery, to a wall, and they were making these things that were having lots of fun. And this guy in Japan that designed the watch, right? The LCD watch, came up with a bigger, better LCD. They took the CMOS process and kept it to themselves, built the CMOS calculator, and all of a sudden, there was going to be no market for calculators. So, as a bridge, Trammell had bought die from this guy in California, and he had reduced the cost of his calculators enough so he was able to play against TI, who at that time was trying to squeeze all the guys doing LED calculators out of the business. And so he decided that he wanted to buy a semiconductor company, and at the same time, the guys at MS Technology were making this high-end calculator, the market was going away. We're in a cash line, and we couldn't dig them out of it fast enough. So Trammell basically bought the company for the calculator business, nothing to do with personal computers. All right. I just took a look and said, I'd really rather live in California. I love living in California, and then in Florida. Oh, nice place, Florida. But I said, I'd rather live in California. So I got on the airplane and flew out to talk to a guy by the name of Andre Souzon. Andre was the engineering manager for Commodore, and I had met him at a previous company that did electronic calculators, and he was enamored, once we talked about it, with the idea of let's go build a personal computer. So he went to come out and said, give these guys some money, they can go off and do it. And in Tramel's inimitable way, he says, okay, I'll give them 6 weeks or whatever it was, some ridiculously short time, and if they can do it, fine, if not, I'll fire them. That happened a lot. Anyhow, so, but Andre and I were totally convinced he wanted to do it. Now, Andre was living in California, he was a very hip guy, and he knew the guy that invented the pet rock. Okay? So, he said, we're going to call this computer Pet. Because if a guy can sell a rock for 25 bucks, right? We can sell a computer that's called Pet. Alright? So, no matter what you heard, Peddle, Eagle Trap, Personal Electronic Transactor, all that, I was stuck with the name Pet because Andre, who was kind of back in the program, was convinced that what we should call it was the Pet. Alright? Now, what's funny, and I'm going to tell you this now because I'm probably forget it later. We were never able to sell the PET computer in France because PET means shit. This guy was a Frenchman. He knew that, right? Okay? He knew it, right? But he loved the name, right? He was totally in love with it. So, okay, so I got Andre's design back at me. We're going to do the PET computer. Peter Sandel and I dropped out of doing MS technology things, and we started designing it. And Peter was absolutely instrumental. He had found 2 companies. Both of them, we had 6 weeks to do this in, right? So you can't design everything from the ground up and do it in 6 weeks and do what we wanted to do. So he had found 2 companies that had boards we thought we could use. One of them was a company that made kind of a programmable instrument, which is what we ultimately used, and the other one was Apple. And he said, you know, Apple's pretty far along on their next generation product. And Andre fell in love with the idea. So he went and talked to guys at Apple, and he said, look, there's 2 of you, you got this little bit of money, why don't you let me put together a deal with Tramel, and we'll buy your company, and you come over and help us do this new computer. So we had meetings with Woz, we had meetings with Steve, and I don't care what you heard about Bill Gates wasn't any part of this, okay? Right? I'm going to tell you Bill Gates' story as we go along. Bill Gates wasn't any part of it. It was Andre Souzon and Jack Tramel and Steve Jobs, because Woz didn't want anything to do with the money part of it. So Woz and I had a big argument about what the computer should be, and I think this may have, to some extent, made Steve make a decision, because what Woz wanted to build was a computer for his hobby buddies. He was, this is at the time Homebrew Club was really taking off, and there was a big market comparatively to what they were doing then for guys who wanted a kind of built-in computer that would hook up to a video screen that would let them write good programs in machine language, right? And Woz had invented a version for the 6502 called Sweet 16. It was actually a very nice little language for writing your own code at the assembly language level. And so he said BASIC was a waste of time, okay? Now, I knew I was building a machine for BASIC. I actually knew that because I had talked to all these millions of people. I knew the market, right? So I basically said, look, we're not going to do that. If you come over, you get to work on it, but we're going to do a BASIC machine. And so at the same time, Jobs wanted $300,000 for the company, and Tramel wanted to give him $50,000. And ultimately, the 2 of them couldn't come together. And the thing that, luckily for the Jobs, and to suit Steve, was Mike Markula came into their lives. Mike had money, he was interested in something new, he fell in love with the idea, and he said, screw Tramel, I'll give you the money to go. So that deal never happened. It really hardly happened, okay? But one of the key factors was and one of the things that actually made Apple quite successful was Suzanne was the guy that kind of put it together, and he kind of liked the guys at Apple and everything else. In about the time we got the PAT done and was going to show it to Trammell, he and Suzanne got in a big fight, jack fight, even though he'd been working for him for 5 years. Andre went over to Apple and said, I will make you successful in Europe. Give me the European distribution rights. And oh, by the way, I'll put money in now to help you guys get the product to market. Andre became one of the richest guys in that whole Apple deal, because when they were going to take the company public, somebody discovered that one guy had all the rights into Europe for this product, and they basically said, guys, you can't have that. Now, Andre, being a relatively good negotiator, got an enormous amount of Apple public stock. So he went on to let Trammell throw him out, name the pet computer, help us build the original one, and become very, very rich because of Apple. Okay? I'm sorry, we deviated. I just want to get some of these key players in the way. Peter Sano, who had done all this wonderful work, he helped me when we couldn't do the Apple II. We took this other thing, we actually built this wooden case. Peter and I were both out of the computer industry. We know what a monitor should look like. We knew what the line should look like. We had this nice, smooth, pretty product. And I had a prototype for it. We did it in wood. We'd gone out and get some guys to talk about tooling. And remember I told you that the calculator business was just going to hell. Well, Trammell didn't have the money, you know, he would admit it, to tool the case we wanted to use, right? So, and he didn't like the keyboard. Now, I got to tell you about the chiclet keyboard, because it really and truly is one of those cases where sometimes you have to listen, and sometimes you're right, but you're really wrong for a little while. Trammell had built his first calculators with calculator keyboards. And then this funny company called Hewlett-Packard comes along with this crummy little calculator with keys you have to kind of poke your finger into and kick his butt, right? So he said, why do you know that the personal computer, which is a new concept, doesn't want a lot of keys that you can punch like the HP calculator and not like a typewriter? And he said, oh, by the way, you remember the typewriter was designed to be too slow to type on because the typewriter had to be slow. Well, you know, that was pretty good logic. Right? He was actually, it was a logical conclusion that was wrong. Right? But the reason he did it, even though he wouldn't admit at the time, is he didn't want to tool a keyboard either. He had this keyboard, a Japanese keyboard. We were able to fool around with it, make it fit inside, and put all those nice little characters on it. So then the next revelation was, well, I got this sheet metal company in Toronto, and they're supposed to be making cabinets and selling, but they're not selling enough cabinets. So instead of paying tooling money, we're going to design the original PET so it's made out of metal. And we're going to make it so these guys can make it in this factory. That got me very hysterical, because, you know, I knew, even though it didn't matter as much as I thought it did at the time, that what we wanted was something that was sleeker and nicer looking and everything else. But those are the stories about why we had the chiclet keyboard and why the original PET is a set of square metal boxes welded together, right? So that's one piece of the history, and that ties you together with Suzanne, and it ties you together, but it doesn't get the key players in it, right? There's a couple key players. So we're going to take Gates and bring him into the story. I was in Pennsylvania, and this guy calls me up from Microsoft, and he says, I've written a version of BASIC for the 6502. And my boss told me I'm an idiot, because the 6502 is a crummy machine. So he wants me to get rid of it. Would you please help me? So when I'm driving across the country, when I'm doing this path, I load a van up with one car, tow another car, take my wife and a couple kids in another car, and we drive across the United States, because at that point in time we were doing everything on the cheap. And so I come through Albuquerque, and I go into Bill Gates' office, which was 2 rooms over a bank in Albuquerque. And we sit down and we talk about BASIC. And he basically says, Gates says, whatever Wyland wants to do to get rid of this product, I'll help him, right? So Wyland flew out to California with me. Peter, he and I sat down and we did the extensions to BASIC that you see today. The I/O instructions. People that don't believe that what I'm saying to you about the extensions that we made to BASIC have a very simple way to test me. If you look at a PET keyboard, you'll see these funny little card symbols. If you look at the ASCII extended character set, you'll find it in the same place. And the reason was is we needed to make cards because we wanted to use text graphics. So we extended the ASCII character set. And ultimately, most people just kept our extension, partially because Gates drove it. So the extended character set, if you look at the extended character set, you still find the little hearts, diamonds, and corners, and all that stuff there. And that's because we wanted to make a keyboard, see that's how we made this little chiplet keyboard, that people could make figures with, and they could make cards with, so therefore, what we did is we extended BASIC so we could do the I/O we needed to do to drive the tape drives and run the IEEE bus and all that sort of thing. But we also put in the extensions that allowed us to do the drawings and to do the, and we extended the ASCII character set. So what happened then is we did the extensions, they wrote them, Wyland wrote them, and then Gates said, I want to sell this to you. And we said, well, we can't have much money. So he says, okay, you can have it at this price. And I'm morally committed not to tell you how cheap it was. But you couldn't buy a car today for what we paid him, okay? For the original BASIC. Because he didn't believe in 65.2. So that was an important step in Bill Gates' life that he made for the wrong reason, right? And you never heard the name Rick Wyland, because I don't think he got rich, right? But he was the guy that did it for Gates. Okay, so we've got a BASIC. We know it's good. We know that we're going to build the product in BASIC, and we know the BASIC is now strong enough to do the kinds of things we know we need to do. We started designing a keyboard. We have a couple Japanese guys that are helping us design that. We have a box. One of the engineers. So I get in touch with this guy in Florida with a ponytail, and I said, how'd you like to come to me in California and build the next generation computer? I said, well, I got nothing else to do. He gets in his little car, drives out to California. Now, this guy's name is Bill Cyrick. He's one of the most influential guys in the personal computer business, and he's never got any credit, and he never will, because he's a very quiet guy. Got to tell you a little Bell story. When Bill pulls up to my place in California, he's got this crummy little, remember the original Honda, right? And I said, well, when's your stuff coming? And he said, well, it's not. He says, I'm like a turtle. I don't own anything that I can't put in this car. Okay? I want to tell you about Bill today. He's got a house in Hawaii. He's got a house in Northern California. He's got another house in Arizona. He owns several cars and a wife that loves to spend his money. Okay? Bill does not, Bill Silent is not anymore able to get around in a single turtle type environment. But it was a funny transition. So I get this ponytail guy that's a good engineer, but not that great a programmer. Here's where my friend Roger Camp changes the world. I needed a programmer. I didn't have a programmer. I called Roger Camp up because it's just the time that students coming out of school. And I explained to him what I was doing, and I actually tried the idea out of him before, when we met before, and he liked the idea. And I said, can you suggest to me somebody that would help me finish this computer? And he says, well, I got this loaner that works for me, and he's getting ready to go to IBM, and he's just going to get eaten up at IBM. I'm going to go tell him personally to get on an airplane and fly out and see you. The guy flew in, and I kidnapped him. Right? I put him in a hotel room, he didn't have a car, and I put him in a hotel room, and we brainwashed him for about 3 days. Okay? So he decided that he would come work for us, and he called up Roger, and he said, I'm going to do it, right? And we said, okay, we'll buy you some clothes, just stay here. So the guy stays like 3 weeks before he goes home, gets the rest of his clothes, and comes. And we by that time, we laid out a lot of the operating system, everything else. Really good, really strong guy by the name of John Fagans. Well, about 2/3 of the way through this little session, somebody in panic calls Roger from IBM and says, you know, you got this nice guy, nice young guy, who's supposed to have reported here about 2 weeks ago, and we heard he left to come report to us. And we were afraid he got kidnapped. And Roger said he did. Because he had. That's how John Fagans became the guy that not only did the original software for the pad, he was the guy that did the software for the VIC-20, and he's the guy that did the software for C64. John was a very quiet guy, but his way he did code and the way he organized himself and the way he did our operating system, in my opinion, was one of the keys that made our product possible. So I had this really weird hippie guy by the name of Bill Seiler who made the electronics work. I had this kind of shy, kidnapped guy who was doing the software. A gentleman by the name of Fuji, who was a Japanese engineer who was putting the thing together, and a guy by the name of Weber who read up on Adam Osborne's way of making a monitor and went off and started trying to make a monitor. And one of the things I had to find is I had to have a cassette drive that we would put into the box, because at that point there weren't any floppy disks that were being done. And so Fuji said, well, you know, I can get you this cassette, it costs about this much, and these guys will support you. And he says, I can get you a flyback from this company and a yoke from this company in Japan. And so we kind of put the thing together. And so I got this hard drive in my hand. I mean, this cassette in my hand. And we start trying to record on it, read back, and it doesn't work. And I don't know if any of you were around during the time when everybody tried to make cassettes, write programs, and beat them in. Woz did one for the Apple, it didn't work very well. Nobody stuff worked very well. And I wrote the last piece of code I wrote. Because what I did is I sat in the lab with a scope in my hand and a development station in hand, and I kept tweaking the code till the screen looked good. And because we had this limited space, every piece of code I wrote was undocumented. Right? It was the worst piece of code you've ever seen in your life. I had 6 different guys. Ask Russell when he comes up, because he was one of the guys that was told to see if he could go in and rewrite it. Everybody looked at it and said, bullshit. Why am I going to touch it? How am I going to look at it? Because it's so bad, but it works. Right? And so that piece of code still existed in the pad forever, right? It really did work. Our cassette worked better than everybody else. But literally, I wrote it with a scope in my hand and just writing code and no documentation. And 2 months later, I couldn't remember how it worked, right? And people would ask how it works. The answer is, I don't know. I wrote it real time. And so this little piece of undocumented, wonderful code was the last thing we needed. We were able to start reading and writing cassettes. We made a terrible mistake. We designed our computer around MOS Technology memory. Well, MOS Technology was a good company to make 6502s and big calculators, but their memory didn't work. We thought it would. So we had to go in and redesign the product in a real hurry around some Cinetech product, which luckily did work. And we were able to get, so if you got a very early PET, it may not have worked, because we built them with this product, the memory product, it didn't work. We changed really fast to Cinetech at that point, and ultimately put other people's memories in. But the reason we were doing it is tremendous money, remember? So we had to use everything we could get from MOS Technology, because he owned the company, so building fabs, there was nothing, right? He was already paying for the company. So 6502, all the other stuff, everything in ROM was all of that. So one of the key concepts was putting the ROM in BASIC. When I'm putting BASIC in ROM, remember, I had a crummy cassette. Seiler was one of the few guys that ever paid Bill Gates for his software, and he tried loading it off cassette. It was a real serious issue And it sounds to you obvious. But at that time, ROMs had just exploded, right? They'd gone from really small to really bigger. And so the idea of building in the basic operating system, how the screen worked, and all that stuff in ROM was brand new. And in fact, Radio Shack actually did their first machine in such a way they had to redesign it to be able to fit enough ROM space in because they screwed up and didn't put a basic in. Apple had to hack around their machine in order to be able to get the basic in. I put it in ROM anyhow, already. And we designed using a ROM, and because OS Technology was good at making calculator chips, which are heavily ROM-based, they were able to make a good-sized ROM that worked. And we made good Commodore chips that worked, which is why they made the Atari game work. So, at this point, we know we're going to be in ROM. We know we're going to be able to do all of these things. So, we were ready, okay? Jamel wasn't. He basically said, build me a prototype and show it to Radio Shack. So Peter and I worked day and night, literally 3 days, 3 nights without sleep at January CES show in Chicago to get a computer that we could show Radio Shack. Well, 2 days into this thing, we finally get the screen to start to work, and we discover it's upside down. I don't know if any of you ever tried making your own monitor. That's a fairly common mistake. Right? So like your eyes, right? Your eyes where you see everything upside down. Well, if you build it initially, you'll make it you'll make the screen upside down. So we had to learn how to do that, call it California, and I think we actually got Anna Mosman to teach us how to do it, to put it right side up. And we got the thing ready, we showed it to Radio Shack the last day of the show. The guy at Radio Shack says, okay, I want to buy 100,000. And Jamel says, okay, but you got to buy 3 million calculators with it. The guy says, screw you on the left, I'm going to do my own. And literally, that conversation took less than a day. And so the product we had designed, which was hoping that we'd get a big OEM contract from Radio Shack because Jack needed the money, had gone out the window. So at that point, Tramel's a little bit impressed with the fact we worked so hard and sort of got something to work. So he said, okay, keep going for another 3 months. Well, luckily, what happened in that 3 months or 4 month period, whatever it was, is this funny little show called the West Coast Computer Fair, right? Which is the very first hobby show on the West Coast. And we all went to this show and we took a working, quote unquote, working prototype. And Apple took a quote unquote working prototype, and most everybody else was sitting there with hobby computers. But what impressed Tramel was standing outside of this hall was this queue of people paying $25 to walk in and look, okay? Because there was nothing happening in the show, you didn't get anything free or anything else. And $25 at that time, it's 1977, right? Was not a trivial amount of money for an engineer or somebody to clock it out. So Tramel said, if we can do this, we're going to be like HP. I said, okay, that sounds good. I like HP, right? At the same time, I wanted to do an I/O structure, and I wasn't sure, even though I told you all those great marketing reasons for why I did the computer the way it is, I wanted to give myself a back door. The back door was if I put an IEEE interface on it, I could sell it against Tektronix and all these other guys who were making IEEE controllers. And they were making it for $2,000, and I could sell this thing for 500 bucks. So I had a computer running BASIC, which is what you needed to be able to run your instrument, that was running IEEE, right? Now, I'm saying to Jack, I'm like, HP actually had to go sign an HP license, right, to use the IEEE, but it was a very trivial license. So I'm getting ready to get to go to the show in Dallas where we knew we could start taking some orders. And start showing people. We did a show in Chicago, and one guy told Jack, here's $25,000. I want the first computers, right? I want to be the distributor for this area. I want the first computers. Here's your money up front. Okay, so now Tramel is really hung up on his HP thing. So I'm getting ready to go to the show, and Jack says, I want you to be like HP. And I said, yeah, Jack, I've done all these things. He said, no, you don't understand what I mean by like HP. HP announced their programmable calculator, And if you want to buy that programmable calculator, you had to send them $350, and they'd send you the calculator in 90 days maybe. So you go to the show, and you sell the computers, and you take the money, and if we get them produced in time, fine. If we don't, maybe we'll give them the money back. So that's what he meant by HP. He didn't care about quality, he didn't care about anything else. He just wanted the money in advance. So we got on to the computer show, and this is getting to be a little tedious, but I think you're going to see that we kind of almost closing this up. We go to the show in Dallas, and this was a national computer show. The top 2 floors are all IBM, Sperry. I think she was out of it, but all these big computer jocks. They got great big booths and salesmen with suits and everything else. And they put this crummy little space in a basement, literally, where you could go in and set up your computer vending booth, right? So we took a space, and we had, at that time, we'd made 7 computers work. So we put the 7 computers up there, and I kind of tied them together, and I would get up and give a half-an-hour pitch about why you want a personal computer, and then I'd step back, and my wife stood there, and people were passing checks from 5 people deep, 4 to her, trying to get on the distribution list in the right order, okay? Because that was the idea. You know, if you paid your money now and you got on the list in the right order, that was the order you were going to get the computers with. And it was 90 days, no guarantees. So I was having fun, but I wasn't needed because they were someone's checks. So I walk upstairs to the show. On this entire first floor was not one customer. Everybody in the booth were the salesmen hanging out, and about a third of the salesmen were down trying to get my wife to sell on a computer. That was the last time, right? The last time, 1977 was the last time the computer industry lived. They didn't know it for about another 5 years, right? Ultimately, IBM had to go in, everybody else had to go in. But that was the last day. And it was because what we had done was to build a computer that did what people wanted it to do. Now, was it the ultimate computer? No. We went on and we put floppy disks on everything else. I just wrote a note about WAS. You know, when we all started, we were kind of competing, but you know, ultimately we weren't competing. Gates would go to the show, Marco would go to the show, I'd go to the show, John Roche would go to the show, whatever it was, a financial presentation, anything else, and we would have to tell people why they wanted a computer. And people would say, well, you know, why do I want a computer? I don't need to keep track of my checkbook or anything. And we said, you have to own one to know why you want to buy it. But it turns out I never had to tell one person who had ever programmed in BASIC why they wanted a computer. Once they saw the computer, they bought it. Right? 6 months after we were in the market, Radio Shack and Apple had to go to Gates and get licenses for BASIC. Now, Apple went, they paid about 3 times what we paid. Roach went and he told Gates, he said, look, I don't want to pay you what you want, because he'd double the price again. So I was for the Z80 and Gates liked the Z80, so we wanted a lot more money for it. And Roach said, I don't want to pay that money. Why don't you take a fee for every computer I sell? Gates said, I don't need $25 a month. Okay? What I want is more money. That money that he got from Roach and those guys gave him enough leverage that when we introduced the computer in Japan, there was a guy named Kenichi who started a magazine. I was 19 years old, started a magazine called ASCII, which some of you may have heard of. Kay came to the United States, met Gates at a show, the 2 of them fell in love with one another. He went up to Microsoft, put Gates into Japan to do what was called the an X computer, okay? And all these guys paid Gates up front for BASIC. So all of a sudden, Gates had a standard product called BASIC. You had to have it. And he, Bill Gates, now had a bunch of money from these guys in Japan. Those guys in Japan had the misfortune to come out with their beautiful new computer right against the C64. And of course, they got killed. right? So you never heard about it, right? Most people in the United States didn't hear about it because by that time the VIC-20 had been out a little while and the C-64 came along and just killed them. But Gates got all this money for BASIC, and he had BASIC established as a standard. Now, we're going to take it down one little path and then we'll go back and finish Commodore. Gates at this point has some money. He decides that he lost his license in Nevada, in New Mexico. Decides he's going to move to, and he wants to go into the applications business. So he makes a deal to steal a guy for Word from Xerox. He makes a deal with a couple of these guys. And he's sitting up there working on applications. If you were to ask him during that period of time what his future was, it was going to be languages and applications. He wasn't in the operating system business. While he was sitting in Seattle, some guys came to him and said, we've knocked off, it can't be that old.
CPM. CPM?
What?
Digital research.
Yeah, thank you very much. Too much. I'm trying to keep too many threads in my head. Okay. We've knocked off CPM. Okay, good, right? I'm going to just tell this one story because I think it's been told badly and I know the truth, okay? IBM started the PC because of VisiCalc and Apple, right? Because of VisiCalc and Apple, IBM was willing to go into the computer business because a lot of their customers were buying Apple IIs and take them into the office, and they wanted to stop that, right? But most of you don't realize that at that time IBM was very successful with a word processing system that they were going head to head with Xerox. So there were two things that control what the original PC was. It couldn't compete with data. So therefore they had to put a lot of limitations in, which ultimately Joe Kruge took out in the second version of the PC. And secondly, they had to target it clearly at the same market as the Apple and less at VisiCalc. So they went on this buying trip. They went to Southern California and they had to buy floppy disks from somebody. And Jaggy Cannon had just gone into business, so they signed Jaggy up because they couldn't buy it from Xerox, who was Stuttgart. And then they went up to Monterey to buy CPM. Well, they had gotten a contract that they'd given the guy at CPM, and there were a couple of phrases that the CPM contract had in it that IBM, under their consent decree, could not sign. So they kept telling the people that were talking about CPM, we can't sign your contract. Please accept these changes. We're not going to rip you off, none of that kind of problem, but please, we're in a consent decree. They didn't actually say we were in a consent decree, but it was obvious what was going on. And the following fact is true. There's a big story about Kildall was out flying an airplane. He wasn't. Mrs. Kildall and the guy that worked for me were sitting in a room with these guys from IBM, and they kept saying, we need to have you sign this. And the guys would say, we can't. Please go talk to your lawyer again. Go outside and talk to the lawyer. The lawyer was with the head of CPM. And the lawyer kept saying, don't worry about these guys. You sold the contract to TI, they didn't do anything. You sold the contract deck, they didn't do anything. Don't let IBM change it. The guys were making money off of them, or the guys doing the SOL and all this other thing. And if you make this change, I'll have to go back and redo their contracts. So the guys from IBM got an airplane with no resolution. And Kildall didn't meet with him because he didn't want to tell them no. He was trying to still got a deal. They flew up to meet Gates. They signed the deal for the BASIC. Gates told him he was going to do some stuff with Word, things like that. They were all interested in that. And they said to him the following set of words, and again, I know this could hurt. I wasn't there, but I talked to people who were there. Would you please call Kildall and tell him you just signed our contract? He should sign it too. And Gates made a momentous decision. He says, I don't have to call Kildall. I'll give you the system. He went off and bought the MS-DOS. The future is what you saw, right? I don't know if you know the ultimate story of Gary. He finally committed suicide. Terrible story. Terrible bad for him. Never listened to a lawyer. Okay, but that BASIC that we signed up for on the way driving across the country is the reason why Microsoft is where they are today. And if you ask Gates, he'll admit it. All right? So Commodore literally drove that market and the following on markets. I'm going to finish the story. I told you about Fagans, I told you about Fuji, so I think I've got almost everybody that matters up to a certain point. At this point, remember Dr. Camp. Well, what happened is Dr. Camp, I went back to the well and said, well, I got to go develop a disk drive system, I need some more people. And he gave me Scott Patterson and Glenn Stark. Glenn Stark's one of the world's best engineers, truly one of the world's best engineers. We're very lucky to get him. He just was just great. And Scotty is a great programmer, but Glenn is just spectacular. The two of them came out right out of school and designed a floppy disk. And the first one they did didn't do random read and write. So we had to kind of change that a little bit, and we finally did one. The problem was while we were screwing around, Woz came out with his disk drive, which was not anywhere near as elegant as what we're doing. It didn't work as well as anything else, but he beat us to market by 3 months. And Jack Camel never forgave me that we did that. So it was kind of the beginning of my end with Commodore. We did do a dual disk drive system. One of the things we did at Commodore that was very important, and again, I'm not sure everybody has this in their mind, obviously you can't have a computer that does what you want it to do and not be able to list it, okay? Well, the only printer we have is a teletype, right? Or you can buy a Centronics printer for about $2,000. Okay, so I got this $350 computer, and I hang a $2,000 computer on it. So I went to the guy that had Centronics, and I said, look, I need a computer that I can sell for in the same price range as this. And if you'll do that, I'll guarantee you a few million product. Because at this point in time, we knew the patent was going to take off, and we could see where we're going with some of the other things. The guy basically said, the guy at Centronics said, I remember sitting in his hotel room in New York saying this, he said, I don't need to do that. You guys will come and match me. And in that room, I told him, I said, listen, it's real simple. I'm going to Japan. I'm going to get a product that meets my price point, and they're going to kill you. Now, this is the last time you get to have this conversation. Am I going to do that, or are you going to do it? He said, go. You can't beat me. So we went to the guys at Seiko, right? They built the first computer. They built took one of their calculator printers, extended it. I sat down and designed the hardware interface for it. And ultimately, the Epson became one of the world's larger suppliers of printers because of that stupid conversation. You know, once Epson was successful, other people copied them, and that's why Canon went into business and other people. But it was ultimately Seiko and Epson that did it. So Commodore, first printer designed for personal computers, and effectively forced the industry that became the printer industry that you know it is today. So we pioneered in built-in screens, right? Mac came back and did that. We did it, Victor. I mean, it's been back and forth. We pioneered in the use of floppies, real floppies. We had developed in our research lab a hard drive, even though hard drives weren't ready. We had done the camera. We had done a whole series of things. We were working on a product at Tramel's direction that says kill Apple. I had taken a small hiatus and gone to Apple for about 6 months, left Commodore, went to Apple. During which time, Steve and I were talking about what became of Lisa, and he went to PARC and decided that he was going to take the logic from PARC and create, which is effectively Windows in the Apple operating system today. And he was right. He was wrong about what the Lisa was. The Lisa was too expensive. Luckily, a guy by the name of Jeff Raskin invented the Mac and saved Apple again. But that period was very useful for me because I was there, and we knew I kind of knew where Apple was going. So Tramel wanted to beat him, and so I'm going to take it on at the end of the story. We've now built several extended versions of the Commodore product, most of which were sold mostly in Europe. Right, and you've seen them, they're the fancier printers, the machines with more memory, these products. And we were getting a reasonably decent business market for those products in Europe. But Trammell wanted to knock off Apple, and he wanted to be in the consumer electronics business. So this is the final story. Remember I said Bill Seiler? Bill Seiler was in love with games, right? Just absolutely in love with them. So, and he got really good at video. So one day in the lab, which we were fooling around with, he took one machine and he built this 20-screen product on the screen, and we started playing with it, and we could run the BASIC, and we moved 2 or 3 games to it. And he said, you know, MOS technology is working on what ultimately became the C64 interface, but it's delayed. It's going to be another year. Why don't we go show this to Trammell? So we took it to we were actually doing a demo at the January Consumer Electronics Show. We set up this little technology suite, and Seiler brought his little machine in and showed it to Trammell. And Trammell was pissed because he said, you guys are supposed to build the Apple knockoff machine. This is not the Apple knockoff machine. Don't bother me. I'm going to finish the story right now. Without the work that the guys at MOS Technology did to follow on with the work that Seiler had started but was told to stop, there never would have been a VIC-20. There never would have been a Commodore 64. Because shortly thereafter, Trammell disbanded our laboratory and all of us went off to do the first MS-DOS machine. But because the guys at MOS Technology picked up the ball and ran with it, saying, this is a product that needs to happen. They got Jack to listen. Seiler actually did a lot of work. Stark did the interface. Fagans did the software. It doesn't matter who did that, but the drive came from the guys in the lab. And then we bailed out because Trammell basically told us to quit doing what we're doing. And we knew that we wanted to build a business computer, so we went off and did the first MS-DOS machine. And at this point, the Commodore story moves to the East Coast. And I'm done because I've told you the people that got us there, and I've told you the story of how we got there. And we got there because we knew the market. We got there because we paid attention to the market. We were doing machines for the market. And we did a whole bunch of innovations because we had a small set of smart guys. I will tell you that that small set of smart guys went a good part of it with me. We did the first clone machine, it was a super clone, and we won our Computer of the Year award for that one. And then about 5 years later, we won a Computer of the Year award for our data pack. That team stayed with me forever. We did a lot of very wonderful things together. Commodore literally forced out most of the team. Luckily, Fagan stayed for Commodore. Luckily, Fagan stayed. Shiraz picked it up, and really the West Coast, the East Coast guys picked it up and drove it. I know Russell had some things to do with it, and he's going to tell you about that. And I'm sorry, my story ends. I told Jack Trammell, who sued me, took away all my money, I made a Commodore, everything else. I told him about 4 years ago, when I met him for the first time in 10 years, that he gave me a chance to do something nobody else would do. The Commodore machine was what I wanted to do. We did it. We did it as a small team. It worked. The things we did later on worked. But without Trammell, without Peddle, without all these other people I told you about, none of this would have ever happened. And I've tried to, in this little story, tell you about how we got there and why we got there. And one last little piece. Seiler got to be really good with computers, right? By the time we were ready to go. And he's sitting there playing with it and everything else. And we're getting ready to go to a show. And I said, look, Bill, in a year from now, there's a whole bunch of kids that are going to take this machine you've been playing with and they're going to kick your ass. Because they are going to grow up without any inhibitions. They're going to know how to do any, remember this Prodigy Man? They're going to grow up with the ability to create anything. You're too inhibited. He didn't believe me. He laughed at me. A year and a half later, he comes to me and says, you're right, they're kicking my butt. And he was good, right? What's happened is, and probably 3/4 of the people in the room I'm talking to, are the people that came along next. And you've created a world. I happen to live in it, a bunch of other people in it. We had the fun to start it. We've had the fun to see it grow. But the people that made it happen were the people that came along next that could feel about computing in a totally different way because of what we did. End of my story.
This is Evan. We're going to open it up to Q&A. Haynie and Bob Russell, Bill Hurd go first for about 10-20 minutes.
Well,
then we'll open up
yeah, but you're not, okay, but wait a minute. Russ has got to say hello first.
Hello, Jeff.
I know you never forgave me for the fact we left you behind.
Well, it's a kind of mutual decision there, I think. So.
I know it was, but I was just teasing, right? No, seriously. We lost track of you, you know, in the last few years. So hopefully you're going to tell me what you're doing sometime, right? I've tried to reestablish contact with some of these guys.
Well, I'll send you an email where Will's at, because I run into him at auto shows, still with regular faces out here, so.
Yeah, well, but I'm also interested in what you're doing. I think you and I got caught up one time, not that long ago. But you got to see my factory, my 4,500 computers. You got to tell me what you're doing, okay? Anyway, I'm sorry for this personal interlude, but he was, by the way, where did I hire you from?
You got me directly, Roger got me into your organization, so.
That's what I was going to make the point. Good old Roger Camp fed me the best people in the world for a long time before I finally screwed up and moved him to California, right? It was like, you know, I think every year he'd find somebody that could stand weirdness and send them our way. And, you know, those people, every one of the team he sent me was spectacular, right? I mean, they were all a little idiosyncratic in places, right? You less than some of the others, but on the other hand, they, you know and I know that they made it happen.
Okay, this is Evan again. We'll have 15 or so minutes of Q&A from the other Commodore guys. We'll open it up to the general audience.
They don't have anything to ask me.
What happened?
How well?
We've all told the same line.
Hey Chuck, this is Bill Hurd.
Bill Hurd, I've read about you now. That book, can anybody remember the name of the book? We should make sure everybody's read it. What's the name of the book?
It's called On the Edge.
What? On the Edge, yeah. Make sure everybody knows about it if they don't already. That guy did a great job of writing you up, right? I don't know you, but I know you drink heavy.
Actually, my last drink was 17 years ago on May 29th.
Is that right? Congratulations.
Yeah, so I just celebrated 17 years.
Congratulations.
So I have the memories of a crazy person that lived in the Commodore environment. We didn't get to be the pioneers that you were. My experience was mostly about kind of the environment we inherited and how to live in the days of Tramiel and live, you know, right after Tramiel. But I do have a Chuck Peddle kind of story, kind of question here. One day I was talking with Benny Cruden. I don't know if you knew him or remember him, but Benny was one of those people that would just light a room up with his laughter. And so in a real stressful environment like that, you'd go seek out Benny sometime. Benny, please help me. And we were talking about something on the O2, and he goes, wait a minute. And he grabs me, and we go into the Talma area, and he grabs Michael Angelina. And Michael says, yeah, we've got that somewhere here. And I go, got what? And he goes, it's over here. And I'm like, what? And he opens the bottom drawer on this of the drawings, and there's like a handwritten 6502 schematic. And this was like a religious experience for me. It's like the lights dim, there's chanting and incense burning, and I didn't know you guys had actually written on parchment that that's what it looked like. It's all coiled up and everything. And we're looking at this hand-drawn schematic, and then suddenly Benny starts laughing, and he taps what would later become known as the SO pin. And it says in pencil on this, it says CP or CPS. Do you remember what that pin was?
No.
And they called it the Chuck Peddle Special Pin. And that was named after your desire for the set overflow pin on that processor.
Ah, okay, yeah.
So it's just funny to see it in pencil written in there. It was kind of a homage to a desire you had to have this input into this. Benny was the only guy I ever knew that used it. He used it in a disk drive for like the fastest 6 microsecond loop you can make or something like that.
Yeah, well, what we did there, I'll be frank with you, we started with I could have spent a lot more time on this to show you. What we did is we took the minimum set that we got from Carnegie Mellon and from Beck, and we put in the addressing extensions I wanted. And then when we got down at kind of the end, we kind of said, okay, what are the things we can add without blowing the chip size? Because one time we blew the chip size 10 mils, which was verboten at that point, and Will and I had to spend like a week, you know, erasing lines, doing engage, doing everything we could to get the chip size back down. So it was hard to get another instruction in, but so if it was something easy, we put it in if we had the pins and everything else. So I think I wrote that. It was there, it was kind of easy to do, so we did it, right?
Right. Was the 6502 really designed to be a printer controller? I heard that rumor, that the X and Y registers were for the print.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. No, X and Y are, you know, obvious, right? X and Y, they're variable, but if you look at them, they're very powerful index registers, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in a computer environment, I understood NXT, but I had to do a design with the PD11, and you know, those guys are really good. They were guys who were really good at addressing, and so the combination, you know, I just did some things that were obvious to me had to be done. But you got to remember, the 6502 was never intended to be a central processor, ever, right? If it wasn't for Gates having an interpreter, that thing would have died. From that standpoint, it would have been used in tons of places, still used in tons of places. But the interpreted BASIC, right, I didn't bother to talk about that very much, but the fact that BASIC was an interpreter is why we could use the 6502, right? I mean, what do you do with a 64-byte stack?
Right.
What? Yeah.
Hey,
Bill did a nice job at the 816. I don't know if you ever looked at the 816, but he did a pretty good job of extending that.
I spoke with Bill Mensch once, and unfortunately the conversation didn't go well. You know, I didn't.
By the way, you're part of a cast of thousands.
Well,
Bill's a nice guy, but sometimes he gets. One time, he and Robert Urkel were trying to kill one another in a bar, right?
I still have a separated shoulder for me and Greg Berlin trying to kill each other in the parking lot of a bar.
Is that right?
Yeah. The conversation with Mensch went one day, you know, I didn't really, when I got to Commodore, I was just so busy doing the things I didn't ask enough about who had came before me. I often told people I got there and the chairs were warm and there was still a cigar going in the ashtray, but we didn't know who had just been sitting there right before us. You know, it was like, wow, oh, what's something to do? You know, we're doing steel studies. But Bill Mensch called me to actually try and get me to use the 816, and he wanted to sell it to the Apple and to us at the same time. And he caught me in a moment when I was busy, and then we started rubbing each other the wrong way, and he started explaining to me that having too many registers was bad, because then you have to just save them during the interrupt. And that kind of ended our conversation. I said, you know, look, I'll have to get back to you. But he tried to sell us the long and short instruction set, which is kind of where processors went. And I walked over to Freddie Bowen and said, can we use long and short? And he said, the kernel will never know whether I'm in long mode or short mode, so no. So that ended my conversation, unfortunately, with Bill Mensch. I should have, you know, but I realized at the time he was trying to sell it to us and Apple and create a Mensch dynasty, as we call it. So that's, I can. Hey, suburban legend, right? Urban legend question for you. You mentioned the pet name. There's an urban legend I tell about the Vic and the Germans telexing over saying, please don't call it the Vic. Do you know that story, and is it true?
Yeah, it has some relatively bad meaning in Germany. I don't remember that. I remember them saying that, but I don't remember what the word was. I remember the French name because it was such a laugh.
Yeah, the story I heard was that we would get a telex that says, by the way, I can, bring the computer over to the ship. By the way, please don't call it the VIC-20. It means fornicate. And we promptly ignored the telex, and we get another one. We mean it. Don't call it the VIC-20, and we ignored that one. And so their answer was, when we got there, they had these VC-20 labels made up for us, and that became the way we used telexes and those stuff.
Hey, Chuck, we had a native German speaker here who was shaking his head saying that's not true.
Really?
Well, it definitely doesn't have any meaning. If you really want to, it sounds like the F word.
Sounds like something.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we
But it isn't. It isn't. It's pronounced different with a V and so on.
Right.
So we also have the story running around all the time in Germany. So we all always suspect it was some crazy American who had tiny knowledge of German.
So, oh, by the way, Vic,
that's why I started my
Vic,
science legend,
I think I'm convinced Seiler had a lot to do with the name Vic, although Yanis was also in the middle of that whole thing. But it basically meant video interface circuit, right? The 20 was the screen size, right? So, I think probably Seiler started calling it that first, but I'm not convinced that most technology didn't. There was such an interaction between Bill and I think mostly Yanis during that period that it's hard to tell. But I'm going to tell you something. I know that Edwards Technology did a lot of the work to make it happen and everything else, but that was Bill Seiler's dream and idea, okay? And he never gave me credit for it, so now he's got it.
Well, I'll wrap up here, but I did want to thank you personally. Because of the work you did, I actually got my career. I started at a company that was an early adopter of the 6502, and then one day I found myself in a room with Bob Russell. Whoa!
Thank you, Bill Gates. Hey guys, I'm going to send Chuck an email to let him know we're rebooting.